Thank you, Jolien. I'm sure there will be many questions and ideas from the audience on your research project, which we can all discuss during dinner, but first we still have a panel discussion. And I'm actually very curious on hearing the views and ideas of our panel members on the current challenges in international academic cooperation. So may I ask the panel members to come to the front and have a seat, and then I will start to introduce the panel members very shortly, which is not an easy task because they all have very impressive CVs and lots of relevant experience on the topic. But assuming you'd rather like to hear from them instead of me going through a long list of activities and experience of the panel members, I'll try to be very brief with my apologies to the panel members for not doing them justice in that regard. So first of all, I would like to introduce you to Professor Tawana Kupe. He's the Vice-chancellor and rector of the University of Pretoria in South Africa. He went to the hassle of being here with us online. So welcome, Professor Kupe. I hope he is here. Yes, I can see him on that screen, but not on this screen, but he's there. Our second panel member is Ms. Irina Ferencz. She's the director of ACCA, and ACCA is the Academic Cooperation Association, which is a mainly European network of national-level funding agencies supporting international cooperation and student mobility in higher education. And ACCA recently published a reflection paper on the topic at hand, so we're very curious to hear the views of ACCA on this subject. Thirdly, we have Mr. Jan Briers as a panel member. He is an alumnus of Ghent University, and he's also the honorary governor of the province of East Flanders and member of the Belgian Chamber of Representatives. His experience in international context might vary a bit from the other panel members, as it lies mostly outside of the academic world. But we are convinced that this will bring some interesting perspectives into the discussion. So welcome, Mr. Briers. But since we are here at Ghent University, we cannot overlook the academic perspective on the topic, and so we invited two members of our academic staff to join the discussion today, Professor Fabienne Bossuyt and Professor Sami Zemni, both from our Faculty of Political and Social Sciences, but each with a different expertise and different takes on international collaboration. Professor Zemni is a professor in political and social sciences at the Center for Conflict and Development Studies, where he coordinates and leads the Middle East and North Africa Research Group. And his area of expertise is politics within the Middle East and North African region, with a special reference to political Islam. And Professor Bossuyt is the coordinator of the Ghent Institute for International and European Studies, within the Department of Political Sciences. And she's an international relations scholar focusing on EU relations with Eastern Europe and Eurasia. And given this regional focus, she's also the co-director of the Jurist platform, which is one of the 6 regional platforms of Ghent University. The panel discussion will be moderated by Mr. Gie Goris. He is a Belgian freelance journalist with 20 years of experience in global journalism, first as editor-in-chief of a magazine called Wereldwijd, and then as editor-in-chief of Mo magazine. He's now retired, but still active as a freelance journalist and, like today, as moderator of discussion panels. So the floor is yours, and I hope that we will have a very interesting discussion.
Thank you very much, Marieke, for introducing and for going through the impressive panel that we have for our discussion today, this afternoon. And the main title of that discussion is How to Approach the Current Challenges in International Academic Cooperation and How to Build Future-Proof Partnerships. We have 60 minutes to solve all of that, and you'll be happy to know that we prepared so that you will be at ease afterwards. You can go to the dinner and just network instead of being boggled by the difficult question that is before the distinguished panel right now. So we arranged that we set the scene that instead of going through elaborate presentations, I would ask each of the panelists first to give us one good example of international academic cooperation that they have been involved in, and tell us very briefly why that has been a good example. And Irina, maybe you would be so kind to open up the debate and give us your best or good example of international cooperation.
Thank you very much, Gie. I'll give my best, indeed, to do that. In starting and mentioning the concrete example, allow me in very short words to explain that in this type of organization that I work for, which is not a higher education institution, I think as you've heard from the introduction, we are what one would call in Brussels talk a stakeholder organization. That means a kind of network bringing together a specific type of organization that is involved very much at the European level in the policy making processes. When it comes to cooperation, it means we are not involved in the typical university level research related cooperation. We're not involved in joint educational development like joint programs and so on, but we are quite active in research and project-based type of cooperation. And the kind of projects we often do, in order for you to understand my example, are projects where we look at specific areas of international cooperation in higher education, like student mobility or staff mobility or English medium instruction, for example. We dive deeper into a specific area and we try to provide a comparative perspective in order to learn from other countries, other higher education institutional practices, and so on. So
now the example is...
the example, well, it's an example of a challenging, of an even difficult cooperation, I would say. We partnered, as we often do, many years ago with a research institute from a European country. And the challenge came from the fact that we had completely opposing views from the beginning of this project about how the research and data collection should be actually carried in this project, which complicated matters for quite a bit. We managed in the way to finally find a way forward and carry out the cooperation because we were pressed with deadlines, as one often is in the framework of European projects. Quite interestingly, though, at the end of this rather tense collaboration at the end of this project, we had completely swapped views, and we, from the perspective of my organization, fully adopted the views of our partners at the beginning of the project that we had completely opposed, and vice versa, our partners completely adopted our own points of view. And I think
Irina, to get this example right, what made the shift possible? Because if you start with completely opposing views of how to even enter the data, how do you end up with this almost romantic view of exchanging views and positions? What happened?
I think dialogue happened, as it often happens in collaboration, because I think we all know that collaboration is not always easy. Dialogue helped, and I think what helped was some basic trust in each other's expertise and complementarity competencies, which in the end pushed us to find a way forward. I just want to say at the end that this actually turned out to be one of the most impactful pieces of research and publications we have ever had, and I really think it is because we were challenged from the beginning to dive deeper into the quality aspects of
so we remember already dialogue and trust, because that seems to be the core issues that you touched upon. I would like to jump over to Pretoria before we continue our panel over here in Ghent. So Professor Kupe, thank you very much for being with us. And as you've understood, we're trying to get some good examples of international academic cooperation. And from your point of view in Pretoria, what would that, for instance, be?
So thank you very much for having me, and a very good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
Yeah. So in the interest of time, like you said, what you want is a good example. So we have a partnership with Leeds University in the UK. It's part of the United Kingdom Research and Innovation Funding. The way we have done it is in order to embed mutual benefit and an equal partnership is also to include two other African universities, the University of Nairobi and the University of Ghana, to train a new generation of early career researchers at Leeds University, at the University of Pretoria, at the University of Ghana, at the University of Nairobi. All of the early career researchers have a mentor in the UK and in each of the African countries. All of the early career researchers and the researchers that are embedded in the project on sustainable food systems have to organize summer schools. So the summer schools rotate between all of the African continent and Leeds University. And because of this co-supervision between Leeds University, the different African universities, the movement of the early career researchers for summer schools in each of the participating universities, and also embedding a policy network which has branches in each of the countries, we've been able to do and are doing trans or interdisciplinary research that is relevant to co-creating sustainable food systems and to producing knowledge that can be shared with policy makers. In that way, if you like, because of there's mutuality, there's mutual benefit, there's mutual cooperation, there's mutual movement, and there's mutual supervision and guidance of the early career researchers. We find this to be the future of international collaboration. Mutuality, common benefit, sharing knowledge, and also not just focusing on the inequality of resources.
One quick follow-up question. I'm curious about this because in your example, you talk about collaboration, not just between your university in Pretoria and the university in UK, but also Ghana and Nairobi. Is that important, you think, that the relationship between an African university and a European university gets balanced in a way that more power or more saying, more decision-making goes to different African universities or participants?
Yes, I think it's important. What I forgot to say also is that it was agreed upfront also that it's a £2 million project. It was also agreed that only 30% of the £2 million will be spent at Leeds University. 70% of the funds will be spent among the African partners. Yeah. I think it addresses at least two things. Typically, traditionally, these relationships are a bilateral relationship between a university in the global north and a university in the global south, in this case, Africa. But when you make it much more of a multilateral, multi-party, in a sense, it balances out. And also, when you openly discuss about the resource imbalances, particularly on the financial side, and consciously, if you like, decide where the money will be spent. Let me add also, I forgot something. Among the partners, there are co-principal investigators. So the principal investigator is not only the person at Leeds, it's also the person at Pretoria, the person at University of Nairobi, and the person at the University of Ghana. Yep. So in a sense, you've addressed all of the traditional inequities and sort of the colonial type legacies that have come with collaboration between people in Africa and in the global north, or people in the global south in general, and people in the global north.
Okay, we will come back to that, I'm sure, later in our debate. Meneer Briers, u bent aangekondigd als de... sorry, we stay in English. But I don't know how you say de vreemde eend in de bijt in good English, so I'll keep that part in Dutch. You have an outsider view towards international academic cooperation, but you have a lot of experience in international cooperation anyway, especially on the cultural field. So maybe you give us one of the exemplary collaborations or that you have been part of, and tell us why that was such a good experience.
Okay, thank you. After I was an arts festival director for 30 years, and before I went in politics, and I went in politics when I was 65. I was for 6 years the provincial governor. And a governor is a bit the ambassador of the province. So I had a residence, I have to say, Mr. Rector, a nice residence. And the ambassadors of many foreign countries came to visit the province. And so I invited them to the residence. And I didn't want to see that as just a friendships moment, but for me it was important to have at the same time a representative of the city, of the port, and of the university with me. And then I needed Mr. Van Huilenbroek next to me, because each of the ambassadors asked the same questions. How can we collaborate better in this province, in an economic way, in an academic way, and so on. And then many of them had no relationship with the province of East Flanders. None. Not an economic one, not in the educational way, not one. And then I always ask, do you have already a partnership between the universities of Ghent and your own university? Because therefore, for me, that was the start. And I have to say, Mr. Van Huilenbroek, you did a great job there, because you introduced them to your own university, and I'm sure that started many collaborations, and those collaborations were the start of collaborations between the two countries. So that was my example of how I tried to help a bit to the collaboration. But I have to be honest, it was not only the educational thing that interested me. I always said a good start to learn to understand each other is the cultural collaboration, co-productions, and that we did also.
And those co-productions, culturally or artistically, and then cooperation on academic level, was that for you a stepping stone towards economic cooperation, or would it sometimes work the other way around? Would economic interest provoke international academic cooperation?
No, it was really, you felt that economic collaborations doesn't start easily. You first have to trust each other. I have seen that in Africa, where I was also several times. When you have already that partnership with the universities, and in the cultural sector, you already you feel that people trust each other. And then the economic part comes afterwards.
Yeah. So trust returns to the table. It will stay on the table, I'm sure. Sami, Zemni, maybe your turn to give us your good example.
Okay, thank you, Gie, and thank you, Marieke, for the introduction. However, there's one casket that you didn't mention. I'm sitting here today more as the head of Department of Conflict and Development Studies, and I say that because then I can tell you that I, of course, have an overview of the different forms of collaborations with the Global South that we have, from the departmental level and faculty level up until indeed the international thematic networks and the regional platforms that we're part of. And of course, the conflict and development studies used to be called, until 15, 16 years ago, the Department for Third World Studies, when this was still a very progressive connotation to give to the Global South. So obviously we're studying the Global South, and thus we have always tried to be very attentive to all these issues that we have already touched upon and that Jolien presented in her research. I'm very happy to say that today there's a majority of PhD students that are non-Belgian, and from that group, substantial part is non-European. So we're becoming more and more international as a department. We do not speak Dutch anymore on the work floor because there's a majority of people who do not speak that language. Now, there's many examples that I could choose from. The example that I will choose has already been mentioned by Guido in his presentation, and that is the ITN, or the International Thematic Network, Governance in Conflict, which is coordinated by my colleague at the department, Professor Koen Vlasseroth, and brings together around 20 partners, most of them based in the Global South, in a network that wanted to work from the beginning, with the focuses on governance and conflict, of course, but with a focus on dialogue and trust, the mutual benefits of doing the research together, engaging in equal partnerships. And the first project to which I think Jolien was also attached big time, I think you were one of the organizers, on silent voices, was actually a whole project to give voice to the people with whom we work a lot in the Global South and who tend to disappear from our publications because they are seen more as some sort of data resource or data producer more than someone who's collaborating in crafting, making, and setting up the research and also carrying it out practically. So for these reasons, I think this is an important network that is still with us today. It went through some difficult time because of COVID, of course, because how do you do that? Have genuine field work with the Global South when you have to stay at home and can't travel.
Yeah. In the examples that you give, Sami, starting from your own department towards the silent voices, there's one quick question that I have, because you want to give voice to people who are not seen. How do you do that in an environment that is totally dominated by English these days? If you don't speak English, how do you appear on the radar even academically, and then also the people that you actually work with?
It's true to a certain extent, but of course it's academic collaboration, and we have to be clear that English has become the lingua franca. But in this case, Silent Voices, as we were working a lot also with Congo, we did everything also in French. And that, if you have those two languages, for example, for Africa, then you can get already very far. But of course, there's also a lot of other languages present in our department. For example, I can take the Arabic language for my part, but there's colleagues who know different other languages that are spoken on the continent. So that helps, of course, to make these collaborations easier. But in general, with English, you can get very far around the world because it has become the lingua franca of the academic world.
Okay. Fabienne, Bossuyt, to fold up the first round of this panel, what was a good example of international academic cooperation that you've been involved in?
Yes, well, this assignment that you gave us was more difficult than I thought. So,
because most partnerships are not really very good?
Well, I did make a distinction. To be honest, I did make a distinction, and the distinction is really the North-North cooperation versus the North-South cooperation. And for North-North cooperation, very easy to find good practices and examples of very constructive collaboration. When it comes to North-South cooperation, it's more difficult, especially if you take into account the findings of Jolene's project. Then I would say that her findings are also very much reflected in how I have experienced this cooperation. But I did find an example, a good example. It's a recent example. It's also, of course, a little bit in the context of the REAST platform, of which I'm a co-director. Last autumn at our research group, the Ghent Institute for International European Studies, we hosted a scholar from Russia, namely from St. Petersburg State University. to be honest, I was extremely anxious because I didn't know how it would proceed. Also, practically speaking, in the current context, it's very difficult to still get someone from Russia to the EU. I was also very much afraid of the reactions at our research group, but in the end, it turned out that, yeah, I didn't have to be afraid, and actually also the Russian scholar didn't have to be afraid, because also from her side, she was very much afraid of the possible reactions and that people would, well, I wouldn't say aggressive, but at least not very friendly towards her. And also from that angle, I can say that actually she was very much welcomed at our research group. Colleagues invited her for informal activities. She was also part of all our formal activities. And I must say this was a surprise for me. I didn't expect it. Also, the reason why she came only last autumn is because of the COVID pandemic. She was supposed to come earlier, before Russia invaded Ukraine. But with the Iris platform, we decided that these are individual fellowships. These are not institutionalized cooperations, so we can still bring over these people, of course, provided that they are not openly, well, that at least let's say that we know that these people are not very supportive of the war. Why is this a good practice? Because it turned out that, first of all, it was mutually beneficial at a societal level. We saw from each other firsthand, okay, how we both look at the war, and also how currently the situation is in Russia, and then from her perspective, how the situation is here. But then from an academic point of view, it was also mutually beneficial. It was truly reciprocal, not financially, of course, but in terms of the learning experience. She is a very promising young academic who's very advanced when it comes to computer-based methodologies to examine international relations, something that we at our research group have very limited knowledge about. So this was truly enriching for our research group, also to the point that we supported her application of a postdoc funded by the Flemish Research Council, the FWO. So this really shows that, yes, it is still possible to have these kinds of relationships and cooperations which are mutually beneficial, where we can really learn from each other. I wouldn't say that all of these fellowships have been disconstructive. There are also some other cases, but the fact that we do still have some of these does say a lot.
Would you say that that this example shows that the turbulences that we're facing in the geopolitical environment should not impact strongly on international academic cooperation, or would that be too broad a conclusion?
Yes and no. And I think maybe later on in our discussion I will come back to this when we are talking about what are the main challenges that we're faced with. It's a very difficult question. I think to a certain extent we really need to keep the dialogue open. But then where to draw the line, because you have to draw a line. We're not going to invite scholars from Russia who openly support the war. That's a bridge too far. But then again, we cannot fully exclude all scholars from Russia. So we have to find ways to still engage with them. But that is very difficult to find the right balance. Okay,
so that gives us an idea. We started out with the good experiences that already brought to the table quite a lot of challenges that we're facing, because we're talking amongst each other, among people who are convinced that international academic cooperation, international development cooperation, that all these levels of cooperation are worthwhile and are important to engage in, but they don't come easily. They come with challenges. And as Fabienne already mentioned, the second question refers to the main title of our debate. What are the main challenges that we're facing when we're engaging ourselves in these different forms of international academic cooperation, whether they be North-South or intra-European or broadly European, or there's so many different levels of it that it's always would ask to be specific, I think. I would encourage to look at funding, as in the introductory speeches, I found it was a recurring theme of what kind of money is there behind the kind of cooperation and what comes with the funding and with the framework. So I think that would be important to tackle. And then also the theme that Professor Kupe already mentioned, the historic relations that come into play when we see cooperation, especially in the North-South relationship. Irina, if you again would like to open this.
Yes, I will, maybe not directly diving into the challenges related to funding per se, but rather coming back also to some of the opening remarks also of Rector van der Walle, related to the changing geopolitical context and how that affects cooperation. And looking very much at the European level debates that I'm most familiar with also through my work, I do see as a current challenge a certain pressure to make cooperation less open or more closed than we're used to in the European context. And there are, of course, good reasons for that. Many of them are related to these geopolitical changes. But we are having, I think, in the European context, at least at policy level, rather polarized debate at the moment, resting on two main pillars. On the one hand, a big discussion in the framework of research cooperation related to risk assessment, to knowledge security, and also to strategic autonomy related to a specific group of countries. And on the other hand, but closely related to the first, is also a bigger debate about values-anchored cooperation and how in the future we should perhaps, and it's still a big question mark, I'd like to raise it like that, of whether we should prioritize collaboration with like-minded organizations, as they're often called in European documents. And I think it's an
Could you explain for those of us less versed in European newspeak than you might be, what is the value-based and what is like-minded here? Does that mean democracies, or does that basically mean not China? Or how should we read that?
In a sense, all of the above. And I want to say, also quite openly, I'm personally quite critical of some of these concepts, but I'm happy to explain, I think, what it's typically meant. I think in the European context, we've been having for a longer time a conversation about fundamental values like institutional autonomy, academic freedom, cooperation based on equal opportunities, and it's been for a long time more of an internal discussion, looking at our own practices. But now, in the changing international context, we are exporting to a certain extent, I think, this debate also on principles of sharing these values also vis-à-vis to international partners, which could mean, if really applied to the same this extent, not cooperating with certain countries or institutions that there is a perception do not share some of the same values to the same extent. And I think it's the fact that we're having in this debate in the European context is good at the moment. I think it's healthy to re-examine some of these principles of cooperation. I do see some dangers in that. And coming back to the points made earlier related to trust, I am personally a bit worried that this conversation focused very much on risks, focused very much on not sharing of values to the same extent, might create a climate of distrust. And I think we've agreed already in the previous comments, trust is a quite important base for cooperation.
I hear you saying two main worries that you see. One is security-based and threatening the openness of European institutions to cooperate across borders and intercontinentally. The second is value-based. How can we maintain that in a way that it allows us to cooperate broadly rather than restrict? And both is probably based on trust, and it goes beyond even the institutional autonomy. It comes into the geopolitical realm, and I might ask Briers to develop on that, because from your own background, both as a politician, now a representative, and before that as a governor. I'm sure that you're very familiar with these questions of in how far can we cooperate with whom? And do you have good advice there for academic cooperation or good challenges that you see?
I've been thinking all the time about the presentation of Ms. Tegenbos, the North-South challenge. I was last year a member of the Special Commission for our colonial past in the Parliament, and so I went for 9 days to the 3 countries, Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, and my best experience, but also one of the most difficult was we went for half a day to the University of Kinshasa, and there we met 40 students of 11 faculties. And there we had discussions with them about what they needed, what they wanted. And I'm going to tell the same words as Ms. Tegenbos: reciprocity, equality, sharing knowledge. That's what they really want, to work with us on the same level. They say, we don't want to go to your universities. Let's come to our universities. Your professors have to come to our universities. Your students have to come to our universities. And why not rewrite our history books together? So then we have the same history on our colonial past. And so I will never forget their last words. So understand it well, and they were not the only ones who called that their priorities. Our first priority is education, and the second one is agriculture, because we are hungry. Not only hungry for the mind, but because they are really hungry. There are tens of millions of people in Congo in a terrible situation. And that's, for me, when you ask for what's urgent, what are our main challenges, let's go there and let's help them, because it's also about the future of the world that we are talking. There I saw also what culture can do. You have, as you said, when you have to speak French in Congo, of course. So the Walloons, they have a cultural center there. And that cultural center really became a place of collaboration between also universities, but between artists, to make films together, to make theater pieces together, and to bring them all over the world. So that should universities also do, collaborate, produce together. Then maybe a second one. Am I allowed? Very short?
Sure.
I'm also president of the European Festival Association. So we convinced 15 European festivals to patronize 15 festivals from Ukraine. And that's not only patronage, that's real co-production, work together. Let artists come here, let them tour here. And that's also what universities can do, patronize a university in Ukraine. It's incredible how you can help them that way. So that are 2 examples.
Working together and standing in reciprocity, produce together, you say, but with the focus in their example of the Congo on making the country, making the students able to produce a better country for the future. Let me go to Professor Kupe for that and see how he sees these combined challenges that you give us of reciprocity and working on an equal footing, producing together in the context of such enormous inequality, I should say, economically and thus also in power. How do you co-produce, how do you create equal and reciprocal relations on an academic level in that context, Professor? We don't hear you now. We don't hear you. Professor Kupe? Does he see me?
Oh, sorry, I was still muted. So I was going to say that I was saying that responding to some of my colleagues and listening to them, I think that particularly the example that I gave was about building the capacity of early career researchers, because we all know that when you are dealing with the Global South, often the research capacities, experience of professors and all of that is richer in the Global North than it is in the Global South. So what you really want to do in the Global South is to build the capacity of people to be able to have the same levels of experience over time, of course, and to be able to provide, if you like, the research capital needed to produce knowledge that is transformative and that is impactful. And also to be able to do it together with them, because building capacity is not, as some people said on the panel, doing patronage, helping these people who are less poorer than others. It's rather building the capacity of these people who, if given the same chances and an enabling and nurturing environment, are able to do it for themselves, but also rather than people doing it for themselves, we're talking here about our common humanity, which is threatened by the crisis of our humanity, is reflected in multiple wars all over the world. The war in Sudan, the war in Ukraine being two current examples. And the crisis of our climate is reflected in things like climate change and so on. That threatens all of humanity. So there are all of these local and global challenges. We should focus of our mind around cooperation, co-creation, building capacities, because at the end of the day, we want to see a better planet and a better humanity. And also we want to advance the goal of sustainability, not only of our planet, but sustainability of ourselves as humans with the rights, dignity, and who can create better circumstances. So the inequalities of resources and this and that pale into insignificance if you think about that way. What are you trying to do? And how are you going to save our planet? And how are you going to save our humanity? And I think that if you do that, actually, then sharing, cooperation, building democratic systems. So I will say, for example, that in some of these situations, one of the panelists was saying, we should really talk about only perhaps cooperating sometimes with those people with whom we share values. I think cooperation and collaboration, especially with academics and students in countries that you might not share values, has a democratizing effect. Those people can become agents and drivers of change. So we must see this kind of academic collaboration as achieving multiple aims, all directed at solving the interrelated crises of our humanity and our planet.
So I understand that you're stressing the fact that the cooperation builds capacity to produce knowledge and to change not just certain localities, but global challenges. And you've named sustainability and climate change as example. And then you go to the importance of knowledge, of producing knowledge, because it is democratizing, you say. There's another question there, is what constitutes knowledge? And is there a kind of a power struggle on who can define what is knowledge and what kind of knowledge would fit into academic cooperation?
So, okay, no, I think that is a very good question, because as you know, all over the world, including in the global north, there's a phenomena of indigenous knowledge systems. And in some countries, including in the global north, where there are indigenous communities that were marginalized. So in Canada, for example, you have the First Nation peoples in Australia, New Zealand. You find them all over the global north in different circumstances. And also, I think we mustn't forget the class differentiation in industrialized, democratized countries of the global north. But there are certain forms of knowledge that have not been validated by the traditional hegemonic academy, if you like, and these methods of validating knowledge through scientific peer review and all of those things. We are all now conscious that there are forms of indigenous knowledge marginalized by power dynamics in any society. that are useful to engage with, and if engaged with in a course, in a scientific fashion, can be, for lack of a better word, when we don't have time, can be integrated in the validated forms of knowledge. And also that marginalized people, subcultures, people belonging in lower classes, often produce knowledges for their survival, quote-unquote knowledges for their survival, which is not necessarily accessible to the academy. And that is why in designing our courses, in designing our research projects, we ought to find ways of accessing those forms of knowledge, ways of living, lived experiences, and, if you like, incorporate them into producing much more dynamic forms of knowledge that are much more inclusive of all of our societies. So there's a whole dimension of this that the traditional model of cooperation has not yet incorporated. Let me end by the following this. Researchers from the global north doing research in the global south, and let me stick to my continent, Africa, often have to engage with research subjects who do not speak Belgian, English, French, or Portuguese. They need local interpreters to understand that knowledge. That those interpreters are also knowledge producers, but the people they access for knowledge are also informing of something that becomes useful to them. Then it's translated into Belgian, French, or Portuguese, some of it lost in translation. Again, I think that's a colonial legacy, because we all do not share the languages of the global north. How do we transform and consciously, ethically reflect on those kinds of relationships and ensure that our research is not only ethical, but you are really actually, in a sense, not treating some people as your servants or your slaves in the research domain, but also as co-creators of knowledge.
Okay, thank you very much. So we need knowledge to democratize societies, but then we also need to democratize knowledge in order to include all groups in society and all of the world in our academic production. Sami, Zemni, that it almost relates immediately back to your silent voices, but probably you see some other challenges as well for this international cooperation.
Thank you, Guy. Yes, I'm going to be repeating what my colleagues were saying, so I'll try to be brief then. Perhaps we have a little bit cold feet not to use the word what we're talking about, and that's decolonization of cooperation, of course, because all these things that we discuss about the ownership, the co-creation, participation, equal relationships, that's, a definition of it. It is easier said than done. It's a practice that needs a lot of time. Trust has also been mentioned, but it's also in doing it that we can learn, I think. Even by sometimes, falling and getting back up on our feet. It's not I don't think we need to have a preconceived plan. We need to have ethical guidelines that are clear. And I think there are, over the last 10 years, different protocols that have been launched and signed, including signed by our university, like the ethics of doing research in poor resource countries and so on, that are really good as a starting point. But they only become realities when you try to, engage with them on the ground. Because, going in the field is always more messy and more difficult than the rules that you have on a piece of paper. Yeah. That is one, I think, concrete issue. And perhaps a second one that I would like to add that might sound a little less important, but it's because I have lived a bad experience because of it that I think it is attached to this issue, is that even all our good intentions to do all this leads sometimes to contradictions in our rules and regulations in terms of how finances are used and not used and this and that. And this can lead to very awkward situations when you're trying to build up mutual trust with your partners in the global south. So it's also important that the university, while it launches all these initiatives, thinks well on the consequences that might have in the need to change certain rules and regulations that are, very well and very well done for the purpose of people working here
Sami,
or studying
you
here.
got us curious. Make it concrete. What was the example? What went wrong?
Okay, very short. A joint PhD contract signed by the rector of the University of the Western Cape in South Africa and Professor Riek van der Wallen for Ghent University, signed by two professors, me in Ghent and my colleague Professor Grunebaum at UWC. In that contract, it stipulates that the South African researcher has to come twice to Belgium for 3 months, and that the supervisor in Ghent needs to provide some living allowance for that person. Now, you know, I had foreseen that, I had prepared that money for her stay, and then when she arrived, it's only at that moment that they told me, no, you can't give that money to her. And why is that? Because of the contract, she's officially a PhD student from Ghent, as well as from the University of the Western Cape, of course, and therefore she can't be paid.
Okay.
And, you know, that was a very difficult situation because I was losing face, I was being the guest, you know, or the host and the guest and this and that. But also because of that student came from, you know, a less fortunate family in the suburbs of the Western Cape. She basically had money for 4 or 5 days. So I ended up paying and going to the bank and giving my personal money to her, even though I, you know, I had money enough for her to have a decent living standard in Ghent, because I followed the rules of Ghent University telling me that if you have a guest, you should at least have 1,550 euros available for a month, at least, which I did. I did even a little bit more. But it took, you know, in the end we found a solution, but it's hard to lose a lot of time. Sure. She lost basically 2 weeks out of 3 months, and me too, a lot of extra, you know, administrative red tape for nothing, to find a very awkward solution that actually, in the framework of het kerntakendebat, has made the head of department, my secretary of the department, and 2 people from the Universitaire Ontwikkelingssamenwerking and the financial services working many hours in actually something that shouldn't be an issue at all. Okay,
I take responsibility for your expanding on it because I was curious. So no, I think it's interesting enough to get the passion that comes with it, because it speaks loudly about the will to cooperate, and then all the red tape and the rules and the contradictions that come with it. What is more important, maybe even, I think, Sami, was what you first said. The process is more important than an ideal solution. We got to work together in order to get beyond what we are today and not lose too much time in theorizing or in setting new rules. We have to practice new practices. That, I think, is important. And it brings us already to the last part of our debate, which is good because time is running out. Fabienne, I want to give you the opportunity, if you want to name a big challenge, but maybe combine it with how would you treat that? How would you fix the challenge?
Okay, I think I will disappoint you then, but yeah, no, it's something that the thing I will address is something that also as a researcher and IR, international relations scholar, is related to my research agenda, so something that I'm looking into myself, and for which I think we have not yet found a solution. So, but I think what is probably the main challenge for the coming years, maybe decades, is how can we actually combine 2 opposing agendas? So which agendas am I talking about? So one is the agenda that we're faced with, namely how to address this increased geopolitical competition, the so-called turn to a multipolar world order that we're currently witnessing, with the other agenda, namely the decolonization agenda, so decolonizing the cooperation, the academic cooperation between North and South. to me, combining this is really extremely challenging, and finding solutions is really difficult. But I further want to entangle this complexity a bit by showing some of the implications of this juncture between these two opposing agendas. Because, yeah, I think if, our academic cooperation with countries in the global south, it's really faced with the double challenge of trying to be inclusive and establishing equal partnerships, whilst at the same time being vigilant for potential geopoliticization and even securitization of the cooperation. And then following up on what Irina mentioned, so the EU is now developing this agenda of, well, maybe we'll have to cooperate exclusively with, or mostly with, like-minded countries, whatever that might be, because how will we define like-minded countries? Then, okay, so does this mean that we really have to return to an Iron Curtain? Whereby academic mobility and academic exchange becomes almost impossible or severely limited with some of these countries which our governments do not consider to be like-minded, and whereby basically mistrust and lack of understanding will take over again. Do we want that? Open question mark. But in Belgium and also in the EU more broadly, we can observe two contradictory trends at the university level, whereby we are seeking to decolonize our academic cooperation with partners in the global south, whilst at the same time institutionalizing mistrust towards scholars and university from those countries which our governments do not consider like-minded. So that, I think, the coexistence of these two opposing trends is hugely problematic. Coming to the solutions, yes, I'm not there yet. I'm still also, together with colleagues from other universities, we are reflecting upon this. But there are no ready-made solutions. To require a lot of reflection, and I think above all, critical reflection. So thankfully, Ghent University always encourages to dare to think. And that is what we do. But the dare to think is not yet translating in dare to act, because we need further reflection on these questions. In any case, also to come back to what Irina said, so this potential future agenda of cooperating mainly with the so-called like-minded countries, when it comes to reaching our goal of decolonizing or working towards decolonizing our cooperation with universities in the global south, well, I think if we would only work with like-minded countries, this will really strengthen the dynamics that underpin the power asymmetries that have been characterizing North-South cooperation rather than breaking these dynamics.
Maybe just a quick question to the panel, and anybody that wants to come in comes in. Trust and dialogue and equal footing are recurring every time again. And a lot of it seems to be dependent on outside forces, geopolitical forces, funding agencies or whatever. But what can academia do to strengthen trust, to strengthen dialogue, to make equal production of knowledge possible? What can academia do? Maybe that's not the final solution. Well, we were against final solutions, but it might be a necessary reflection on what we can bring to the process that Sami was referring to. Anybody? Yes, Jan?
I think more about what can universities do than academia. We see that more and more cities become very important. More important than regions, provinces, even countries. And that's all over the world. And so we talk about smart cities today. What is a smart city? A smart city is a city that knows that it has a university and that collaborates with its university. That's only one aspect, of course. So they have to count on that knowledge of their universities. And But at the same time, that university has to be embedded in the city, has to be part of the city. And I think in Ghent they do a good job on that. But that is, I think, the challenge, that is to have that reciprocity, not only with your own city, but also with other cities in the world. Erasmus City of the Year, that's not only because you have a great university, it's because you work in a great city with a strong cultural life, with the most beautiful historical buildings in Flanders and far away. But at the same time, you have to help that city. And then I look again to Mr. Tawana Kupe for themes like sustainability, because we all have as major occupation today sustainability for all of us. So there, the university and its academia have to help the city, but not only the city, the whole community. And I think there also we have to collaborate. We created now a new festival. We have only one team. That's sustainability. So let's work together towards maybe our most important challenge for the future, that's sustainability. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Was anybody else? Professor Kupe, were you signaling?
Yes. I wanted just to say also that it's the business of what academia can do is also translating research insights into impact, including, and by that I include, among other things, engaging in the policy space with policymakers, particularly politicians at whatever level, the local level, as my colleague just said now, the city level and the national level. This is in part because we have a problem of the fragmentation of national politics all around the world, in the global north as well as in the global south. We also have a problem of distrust of facts, science, scientific knowledge, and also a growing problem of disinformation, misinformation, and propaganda, where, scientific facts, knowledge is distrusted, and academia itself is distrusted. In part, if you like, this is not a problem created by academia as such, except to the extent that academia has been rather inward-looking and also not, if you like, translating the knowledge that we have into the public domain in ways that can counter forces of disunity and forces of that are attacking our humanity and even encouraging and denying the fact that our planet is in crisis. Yeah. So I think that is a very urgent issue. And this cannot be done by individual academic institutions, but it can best be done by academic institutions partnering in not as bilateral institutions, but as multilateral in knowledge networks and in knowledge associations and consortiums. Because right now, I think that it could be said to be a bit on the back foot when you are facing the deluge of disinformation, misinformation, which is enabled by rapidly advancing digital technologies.
Yep. Thank you very much. So international cooperation to strengthen the belief in knowledge, and that can be best done, says Professor Kupe, in international cooperation. Anybody final word on what academia can do?
I would say do what it always did and use the as the starting point for any kind of collaboration, this mutual interest and academic interest. Yeah. This discussion about risks, it's important, risk awareness is important, but I think what should still be the driving force behind any kind of partnership is this mutually defined interest within the context of with international partners for collaboration, and that's a research, education, a societal related interest on relevance, and I still think that should be the driving force, or what's the core of any kind of partnership. And I think now in the current discussions we're sometimes losing sight of that, so I would say bring back also the discussion about benefits of collaboration at the core of the start, and yes, think about the risks too, but not only about the risks.
and maybe we didn't touch upon that, but maybe redefine or reflect on this, using this term partnerships and partners. At LIP, we act as if we're partners, but there's these many inequities that are built in to these collaborations that we maybe should bring to the foreground rather than trying to hide them behind nice terms such as partnerships. I'm afraid we're out of time. So thank you very much for the panel, for their rich insights, for all their experiences that they brought to the fore. I'm afraid we did not make good on the promise that we would send you to dinner with all the problems solved. So there's something that you need to engage on with each other over having drinks and eating something. And if you find a solution, then Marieke is the go-to person at the end of the dinner so that she will be able to take all of that with her, all of your solutions. Thank you very much to all of you.
Wow, apparently I have a big task ahead of me. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen from the panel, for this inspiring discussions. Before I send you all off to dinner, I would first want to thank all the speakers at this symposium. Professor Van de Walle, Professor Huilenbroek, Professor Versluys, Jolien Tegenbos, thank you very much. And furthermore, I also want to say a big thank you to all of the panelists and moderator for contributing to the discussion. We would like to offer you a small gift to show our appreciation. My colleagues Ingen and Annelies will do that. Professor Kupe, I'm really sorry. You will receive your gift once we meet in person because unfortunately live streams are not fit yet to transfer boxes of chocolates to South Africa. So you will receive one once we see you in real life. Let's give all the speakers of the symposium another round of applause, and then you can all go up to dinner.